But Connor, I think it is a great practice. I've done the same thing. Like my very first one, I think I went there twice that morning. I was so terrified that, making sure that everything's good, right? But then I also had a someone who didn't want to, and I went anyways, and I did a video recording. And then I thought to myself afterwards, did I just put myself liable if anything was wrong? And I just want to throw that out there. If they don't want one and we go still, and something happened like right after we walked out the door before the recording.
If they don't want one and you go still, you did your professional best and you have a record of it because you booked an appointment in showing time and that record will always be there. If
Mhm.
you didn't go and then they inherited a problem and they said, well, she never even offered this to me. Well, actually, I have proof that I did. Or, I mean, unless you communicated proof and, it is a CYA mode. Unfortunately, we are in the CYA mode business to a degree, but it's the right thing to do every time. And if they don't want to go, explain to them the importance of going. And if they still don't want to do it, well, to make sure you're best protected, I'm going to go anyway.
Mhm. Yeah. And then I file the video in their folder as a
I mean, that
keepsake.
you can't get much better than that. That's really smart.
That's smart,
Yeah.
Ellen. I need to do that because that's what I had to do yesterday with my guy. He couldn't make it. He had training. And so I went for him and I just videoed and took pictures of everything and
Awesome.
So
that way. But that's okay. I'll put it in the file.
we're talking about the importance of final walkthroughs, and I'm going to walk through. Thank you guys for sharing some of your experience. I'm going to walk through this kind of list I've put together, and we can add to it and subtract to it. But first, I need to ask April: are you eating your drop-off candy for your Easter baskets?
No, no, but I am out sitting in the car waiting until we're done because I've been to two places and I need Lucky Charms cereal bars. Everywhere is out.
Oh,
So I'm on the third Publix
You can just
now.
make them.
I do that when I'm looking
No,
for a certain bourbon. It's the same thing. You just go to all the stores, right? Find it.
I'm about to be done, but I'm gonna try one more place. So yeah.
Well, let's jump
No,
in.
I was
I know you
good.
people have stuff to do. April's got to find Tricks bars or Lucky Charms bars and, all the things. Let's see.
Speaking of bourbon, real quick, guys, if you're in Surf City, highly recommend going by Hidden Ships. I went by there yesterday for a closing gift. So cute.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
And they make their bourbon. They make bourbon, whiskey, gin, and vodka there. Highly
Oh,
recommend.
all right. I like it. I'll have to check it out when I'm in town again. Thank you.
Yeah.
Can you guys see my sheet that I put together here?
Yes.
Okay, so let's hit on top of these just a little bit. It really is why making sure that you don't make this just a formality, just checking another box, right? But it really is a safeguard for you, the buyers and the sellers. So some important reasons. First and foremost, it's verification of the property condition, right? It allows the buyer to make sure the property's in the same condition as they made when they made the purchase agreement, or better, right? Because that's what the offer to purchase says. It needs to be delivered in the same or better condition, and that they can verify that all the agreed upon repairs have been done. Now, your process for getting repairs certified, or whatever word you want to use, is we should be asking for receipts, right? We've talked about that in our due diligence requests and everything as part of the training. When you do the DD request, you're pointing out the items from the inspection report specifically so they don't misunderstand what you're asking for, but you also want paid receipts, right? We want to know that this work was done to verify it. That way, if we have a problem with it later, we know who to go to, right? Yeah, now some items the seller might do or something like that, but we're talking about items that need to be handled by a professional, right? So you should have that, and then you can verify. So I always, advise that you've got those receipts in your loop, you've got the inspection report in your loop, and you can have that open when you go through that final walkthrough, look at your DD request, and, just verify visually, because we're not plumbers or inspectors or anything, right? But we can visually verify that things look like we were told they were supposed to look, right? That's one of the biggest things. Second is identification of any last minute issues. Like the great example that Brandon gave us, had that buyer's agent gone to the final walkthrough, she might have noticed the last minute issue of a tree through the roof. you know, but because nobody went, they didn't know it. And then they bought a house with a tree through the roof. And now it's their problem and their insurance company's problem.
Well, Doug, let me bring up what happened. Yet maybe I already talked about this for the 2 minutes that I was late. Like with Connor's situation yesterday. What do you got? What'd you say?
We haven't.
You haven't. So yesterday when Connor went, she found this gaping hole, if you will, in the side of like the bathroom sink, and we were looking for a quick fix to close it, and I handled that improperly. So we don't need to go into that. I've learned my lesson and corrected that. However, what do you guys do in a situation like that? What do you recommend? Is it changing the purchase price? Is it doing an amendment? What do y'all recommend in that situation?
I think that's a great point to make, and a good thing to touch on, because here's the really important thing to understand. If you go by what we're taught in real estate school, monies are not supposed to exchange hands between a buyer and a seller for anything. For personal property, yeah, that's not part of the contract. Yeah, like for a bill of sale, something like that, that is doable. If they're exchanging personal property, that is doable, yes. But to pay for repairs or closing costs or anything like that, that can't take place between the two parties. So, and I skipped down to the bottom of the page to make a note here. So if you find an issue at closing that you need to deal with, it's got to be dealt with formally, right? It should not be okay, well, hey, listing agent, XYZ is going on. How are we going to remedy this? Listing agent suggests, well, my client will just leave a check for $200 on the kitchen table. While that seems like it shouldn't be a big deal, we don't make the rules. And part of my job as being you guys BIC or leader or whatever is to make sure that you don't break any rules and get in trouble. The correct way to make any changes last minute like this is, if your people really want it rectified and rectified correctly, it's going to delay closing most likely, because paperwork is going to have to be updated to signify what needs to be done. Whether it's an amendment for a repair, or they do some additional closing costs at the last minute, or they change the purchase price, that's the correct way to do it. Brandon, you want to comment on that a little bit further? Because I know you've dealt with it yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I had a closing 2 years ago, a listing where the buyer went for their final walkthrough and the house had been vacant for 2 weeks because the buyer had to delay their closing by 7 days, and the drip pan in the cooling unit upstairs in the roof, the shutoff valve didn't work. And so there was a water leak in it. The part of the ceiling collapsed in the second floor. They found that 30 minutes before closing. And so what we did was we changed the purchase price and had everything signed that day, because that's the right way to do it. Everything is supposed to be accounted for in the closing documents. Many times, if you listen closely at closing, the attorney will have a packet in a document as part of the loan package from the lender that says you're attesting to the fact that no funds were exchanged outside of closing between the two parties. Um, this stuff is always correctable, and you always need to do the right thing. The biggest problem that you have in a situation like this is, if your buyers, or if it doesn't matter if it's your buyer or the other buyer, if the buyer's rate lock ends on that day, then it's a bigger problem, right? And so at that point, you need to call the loan officer. I would call the attorney first. That's the value of working with an attorney that you have a relationship with and you can get on the phone with quickly if needed. But if you're in that situation, I'm calling the attorney first and getting their advice, and then calling the lender if the attorney tells me to. But unless it's a dire straight situation like the rate lock ends today, and if they can't afford to extend the lock, or the seller won't agree to extend the contract, or they simply can't afford it, I'm doing it the right way. And if not, I'm going to the attorney and asking them for advice.
So I can tell y'all the solution that the attorney came up with for that whole situation. So this situation was a little different. We had to close at 5:30 last night, and the attorney's office closes at 12 o'clock today, and they're not back open until Monday. And the seller is contingent on buying their house with this deal closing. So there was a lot of things happening. So we were trying to not prolong closing and trying to find a solution so it wouldn't be prolonged until Monday, because my guy could not get there in any way today before 12 o'clock to re-sign everything. So the attorney did it where he is going to do a check on the seller side, and it's going to be made out to like Lowe's, I think he said, to like to purchase a new bathroom cabinet that was broken. So that way the money doesn't go to the buyer. So the buyer does not have to re-sign everything on his end. The seller just has to sign their document saying that there was a change. So that's how we came to a resolution for this one. So it wasn't prolonged, and my guy did not have to go sign everything
That's
again.
good.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
That's
if the,
about as good as it can get. And that's why it's good to involve the attorney, because they can make sure it's done the proper way. They know what needs to be signed and what doesn't need to be signed. This way it's formally recorded as part of the transaction, right? And your guy's going to get it, because here's one thing, even if it was allowed that a seller could cut a check or send a Venmo or whatever, but in lieu of a repair that was found out at the last minute. Well, what if they don't and your folks have already signed?
right.
yeah. I actually just thought of this, Doug. I apologize. I didn't think of this last night when we were talking about this. I've had this happen twice, once with the seller and once with the buyer. Actually, twice with the seller and once with the buyer. In a situation like this, where you have a last minute problem at the final walkthrough, and you don't want to get the lender involved because it's going to be a shit show. Here's what we've done. We've gotten both parties to agree verbally, and then we've gone to the attorney, and we've done this. Say your client is selling the property and there's $1,000 repair needed at the last minute. You can have the attorney draw an agreement that says they are going to retain a minimum of X number of dollars of the seller's proceeds and leave those in their trust account until the repairs are made and the attorney receives a invoice showing that the repairs have been paid. I've done that probably 5 or 6 times. So like, I had a seller the night before we closed, he was cleaning out his attic and he took one step in the wrong direction and stuck his foot through the ceiling, just like Clark W. Griswold did in Christmas Vacation. And so the buyer was adamant, we have to close tomorrow morning. And so I got a quick quote. The quote was like $2,000. And so we said, okay, we're going to allow the attorney to withhold $5,000 of my client's proceeds until he receives an invoice that this has been fixed and paid for, and the buyer signs off on it. And so that's a good way to get around it without involving the lender, because if you involve the lender, you're definitely delaying closing by a day. There's no question about it, because they're going to have to generate a whole new package.
And that was the thing too, is it was like, good gosh, do we want to like have to redo all of this for a small, in the grand scheme of things, not a lot of money, you know what I mean? So it was like, do we prolong it? Everything's been switched over, and it was just a huge, not a huge deal, but a huge deal at the same time to like redo all of this. So luckily we were able to come up to a solution that did not prolong anything significantly. And
in hindsight on this solutions, we have done so many Lowe's gift cards or checks to Lowe's, whatever, in the past, and that should have been my first go-to, but it was more like, oh, I need to fix this right now. So anyway,
To be fair, it was not, it was a unique situation.
The good
With
thing is that everybody realized, hey, maybe let's talk to somebody else to make sure I know what's going on, because I know Connor called April, and then I talked to Connor, and then I talked to Brandon, and then I talked to April, and then I talked to Connor. So, but that's the whole point, right? Is you've got people around you to help you make sure you're doing things the right way. Because I thought I knew the answer, but it happens to me a lot that I think I know the answer, but if it's a big answer, I want to make sure that I double check with somebody else who's got the experience too. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. That's the whole point of our setup, right? Is to make sure we've got somebody who has our back.
The solution that I gave in hindsight, and I don't know how I didn't think of that last night. I must have just been, I know I was in the middle of something. I think that's probably the cleanest, easiest way to do it without getting the lender involved. If all parties are in agreement and the attorney is willing to do it.
Yeah. If this attorney can just do it, and I just added that to the notes, you know, ask the attorney, see what they say. Maybe they can do something, hold it in escrow, or just cut a check to a vendor or whatever, and keep it clean.
well, how do you keep it clean? Like if you ask the attorney and they're like, yes, let's do that. What documents needed for that?
Whatever
Well,
they need to do.
the attorney is going to draft an agreement that expresses the terms. So let's say, you know, it would be something generic. So and so. Let me see if I can find one, and if so, I'll screenshot
I mean,
it.
I'm trying to think because I have had several of these before, but I didn't know if it's simply an email. But I mean, then are we
It's a
talking about
document that everyone is going to have to sign.
right? And then so that is there's going to be a charge for that too.
Yeah, they're going to charge them to draft the document up, but I mean, you know, these people
Yeah.
don't work for free, just like we don't. And so,
No.
unfortunately, I mean, that's what we got to do.
And if all the documents hadn't been signed yet, we might not ever see it because it's just going to get done at closing. The important thing is that the lender doesn't need to see it because it doesn't affect the buyer side CD, and the lender doesn't care what's on the seller side CD as long as the loan is paid off, right?
That's a good point. Yeah.
And that's how you keep it cleaner, I think. All right, I'm going to try to keep working through the list and make sure that we hit on these points. I think we've hit 1 and 2 pretty good. Number 3, confirmation of included items. You know, it wasn't a walkthrough, but I've got a client that's selling a property that all the property's included. And the buyer's agent called me yesterday and was like, hey, we went there for the inspection and some of the furniture's different and missing. And I had to get with my client and be like, you sold the property with everything. You can't be switching out furniture. Now we got it worked out or whatever, but that's one reason to make sure that you do it, is to make sure that what's there is what's supposed to be there. That's why, you know, items like, I always highly suggest, you know, don't just write refrigerator as seen 10/23 or whatever the day of your showing was. Right? Don't give somebody the opportunity to pop another refrigerator in there.
It actually says on the contract when they revised it 2 years ago, as seen on the date of showing or something like that. It actually says that, so you don't have to write that anymore.
And I didn't know that. That's good to know.
They changed that a couple years ago. But also, if the photos are on the MLS, you've got them dead to rights. I had this happen one time where some idiot switched the fridge out. And I told him, hey, not only does the contract say as seen on the day of showing, this is the photo of the refrigerator on the MLS. Put the fridge back in the house.
And basically, that's what the people said yesterday. She sent me the picture of the TV stand in the living room in the listing pictures, and then the one when they were standing there, and they were not the same one.
Well, they also paid a hefty sum for all the stuff in there. So.
Oh yeah, and it's not going to appraise too, I'm sure. But that's what happens when you sell a property with a bunch of furniture in it, especially one that's not at the beach. So we'll deal with that when we get there. That's why it's important that they get what they're paying for.
Yeah, during post, they suggested that we actually put the model number, like if it's a Samsung 4-door refrigerator, whatever the model is. Probably overkill, but that was their suggestion.
That they might also be an inspector. I don't know. You know?
Yeah. Well, they're teaching the class, so they have to, you know, go.
That's right. That's right.
Above and beyond, right?
I think that since, to Brandon's point, since they added that language that says as was in the property or whatever, you should be covered. I think I just continue to write it just because old habits die hard, but you know, whatever you're comfortable with. You can't typically add too much information, right? And there's a lot of box there, then we usually don't use it all anyways. So whatever you're comfortable with. But making sure that those items that are supposed to be there are indeed there. You know, testing stuff, all of the fixtures should have been tested, right? As part of the inspection, you know, the HVAC, they're going to test the plumbing, the electrical, all that stuff. You might just want to do a quick check as you're walking through, hit the faucets, flush the toilets. You know, I think Janine had a client a couple years ago. They weren't in there a week after they bought it and their whole septic backed up. And it was working fine at closing. So you never know, but at least check that stuff if you're going around, you know, just flip switches, faucets, flush toilets, things like that. Make sure the air is on and running. Seems like it feels okay. Just real quick stuff. Clarification of misunderstandings, you know, just making sure that there's no gray area. Everything has been documented. Everything has been discussed. So there's no opportunity for anything to come up, you know, in the hours between closing and especially after closing that there's a gray area, especially if you're working for a buyer, because after closing, it's done. They've signed everything. They're saying at closing that they're accepting it the way it is currently. And unless you have an amendment that says X is going to be done after closing or something to that effect, or that something's already been paid for and will be completed after closing, then you really don't have any recourse. Am I missing anything there, anybody? You know, peace of mind could be the very top of the list, right? It's really just to know that things meet their expectations, that they're getting what they thought they were getting. They're getting what they signed on the dotted line for. They're getting what they're paying for. And that they don't see anything out of whack or out of place or any last minute surprises that they're going to have to deal with. Obviously, opportunity for seller disclosure. Sellers have probably disclosed everything by now. But again, kind of to maybe for us to double check on that seller disclosure to make sure that what they've told us about repairs that they've had done or work that they've had done has actually been done, to verify the receipts for work that we have in hand or the pictures for work that we have in hand, all of that stuff, right? Legal protection. Well, kind of like we've talked about, CYA. And that's just part of what we do. It's not a bad thing. It's just part of what we do. When you're representing someone, you want to make sure that you've covered your butt by representing them correctly, right? So make sure you do it. Make sure you take the time to do it. In case something comes up later. You have evidence that, hey, I offered the opportunity. I did it. We were there. We left. You were fine. We went to closing. You signed on everything. Didn't have any questions then. Didn't document any concerns, and you moved forward with closing, right? Missing anything there? A lot of times clients will ask me at the final walkthrough, okay, what are we doing here? What are we supposed to be doing here? What do you guys say? What's your script for the final walkthrough? Because they're excited. They're ready to get to closing, right? They're thinking about moving in. They might not be looking for things like we are.
We're here to make sure that the condition of the property hasn't changed since we were here and put an offer on the property and came back for the inspections. And so this shouldn't take more than 15 minutes. We're going to make sure there's no additional water stains on the ceiling anywhere. All the toilets and showers and sinks work appropriately, that the hot water is on every faucet, and that everything that's supposed to be here, refrigerator, washer, dryer, stuff like that, is here. That's it.
Nice and succinct and to the point. Very good. Okay. Opting out. I think I've talked with all of you individually about this at one point. We probably talked about it in a group setting, but to really just formalize it again. If your client does not want to attend a final walkthrough, it's their prerogative. They don't have to. They're not required to be there. If that's the case, you should get it in writing that they're waiving that, right? So we've got it saved for posterity. And if possible, to really do your job the correct way, you should still do the final walkthrough. Okay. Whether that's a Zoom call for them or a FaceTime or whatever, or just go to say that you had a chance to eyeball everything and let them know what you saw while you were there. Right. That
So
way,
Doug, do you like send an email and just say, here, please sign this so you didn't want to go to
yeah.
the walkthrough?
Or you can have it in text and screenshot the text and save
Sure.
that to your dot loop. But
Okay.
yes.
All right.
Document, document, document.
Yep.
And it's not because it's because it's the safe and the right thing to do, and it's what the Real Estate
Sure.
Commission encourages us to do. I mean, the Real Estate Commission wants us to save all text messages with our clients.
Hmm.
We'll talk about that. Never. No, okay. The last one I've got here is dealing with issues at a final walkthrough. So this is kind of what we talked about earlier, and I made some notes to kind of tack on to here. So hopefully that was helpful, and I appreciate, and this was not to pick on Connor at all, but the best use of us learning is to gather from everybody else's experiences, right? That's the whole point of learning from what other people are going through. And then now we've experienced it to a degree too. So we're in a better position to recognize it, face it, deal with it when it happens to us or when we come across it. Who's got something else they'd like to add or think that we've missed anything here? Man, I love it when we're so thorough. We just cover all the bases.
I will say another thing that came up yesterday that we were having to deal with at the same time was we were told that the HVAC needed some repairs. We had an invoice. We sent it to them. We were told that they were going to be done, and I hadn't seen the invoice, so I looked in the HVAC unit to like make sure that it looked like it had been taken care of. And there was like trash, like leaves and stuff in the bottom of it. So I reached out to the agent to say, I was like, hey, has this been done? I haven't seen the invoice for it. Cause it was there was a little bit of confusion with some invoices for the HVAC already with this deal. And she said, no, it hasn't been done. They're coming Friday. And so I had to ask, well, have they already paid for it? Like, is it on to make sure it was documented? She's documented. She said no. So that was another thing that we had to add to the CD at the last minute was get the invoice added to it with the cost. So
Yep.
look in your HVAC units, people.
When you're doing your due diligence repair and request, I would always encourage you to add as part of that text, all repairs to be complete within 48 hours or 24 hours prior to closing. That way,
Okay.
there's no ambiguity. And then, when you do stuff like that, you got to go into your boomtown, put a to do for that day, and remind and just like you're making a prospecting call, check that to do off and call that agent and say, hey, we close in 24 hours. I need the receipt for all these repairs, or we're not closing. Just because once the deed is recorded, all bets are off, right? It's the same as if someone leaves a check on the counter. Hey, we didn't have time to get this done. Cash this check and pay for it. If the check bounces, who cares? It doesn't matter. The deed has been recorded, and that's really all that matters at this point.
That's right. And I think that it says as part of the language that everything on the form is to be done before closing, but you want to make sure that you request proof that it was all done before closing. And definitely before your final walkthrough, so you can verify it when you're there.
I just found those documents. I screenshotted them, and I'm going to put them in the group chat now on WhatsApp. That escrow withholding document that the sellers and buyers signed, and then also the escrow release document, because the sellers or the buyers had to come back and say, yes, this has been done. We give the attorney permission to release those funds. Connor, that situation that you just gave, that is a perfect example of where you could use that. Hey, this was supposed to be done and it's not done. We want to close, but we want the attorney to hold some money aside to make sure this is done correctly.
And that's what we did yesterday. He held the attorney held, I guess they added that to it.
Perfect.
And another thing not related to this, if you're in a deal, please answer your phone if the cooperating agent calls you. To go through a whole transaction and never actually have a phone conversation with the other agent makes it very difficult to get things done.
Dang, I'm sorry, Connor, that stinks.
It's-
Good rule of thumb.
Yeah, it's very complicated trying to do everything over text message.
Takes longer too. Just pick up the
Yeah.
phone.
And
Well,
that's
I
kind of
hope
what
this-
me and people were running into, is that we couldn't have a phone conversation to like get things handled when we had 30 minutes till closing and we were trying to get a solution as quickly as possible without being able to talk to anybody.
Yeah.
That's a great point. Well, I appreciate everyone's participation and contributions today. I think this was helpful, even if for experienced agents, it's good to remember and keep in mind because we all get busy and get caught up in, well, yeah, I've got a closing and walk through this morning, but now I've got showings at noon, so I got to hustle through this and blah, 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 blah. Hey, look, you got to make sure that you're giving everybody the attention that they deserve in the moment, right? So make sure you do that. And hopefully this will help
I
too.
love the accountability. Like, I really do. I mean, I called Connor first thing at 8 o'clock. I'm like, I'm so sorry I gave you poor, information. I said, but I'm thankful that you reached out to Doug and Brandon. And like, I'm glad I have this team to like keep me in line and make sure that, I'm doing the right things. I would never intentionally ever do anything wrong, but it was just kind of like, so I'm thankful. Like we already covered, the team aspect. It's great. It's great to have each other, for the good and the bad. So,
Yep, agreed 100%.
Yep.
Well, you guys go do your thing. It looks like a beautiful day, so enjoy it, make some good stuff happen, and I'm around if you need me, just holler, okay?
bye
And
guys.
Janine and I are
Bye.
doing
Bye.
open houses in Wilmington this weekend. So if you have anybody, I'll be doing it 4 to 6 on Friday. I don't know when Janine's doing it. Saturday.
Awesome. I
Awesome.
actually have a listing going live in Hampstead this weekend too. So
Oh, nice.
Hit us in the group with details, okay?
I will.
With it.
Okay. See you guys.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.